looking at the path forward and the lessons we've gained. And in the studio today, I am joined by two wonderful gentlemen. There's Wakili here, Kennedy Echesa. He's an advocate of the High Court and a law lecturer. Habari Wakili?
Mzuri sana. Glad to be here. This is my first time to be here, and I'll be glad to share my perspective on the things that we're going to discuss.
Also glad to have you. You're looking sharp. You're looking the part for the show.
Thank you.
Karibu sana. And I also have Mr. Elvis Wambura, a leadership and governance analyst. And you vied in the last elections.
Yes, Esther.
So wakati kama huu ulikuwa unalia pia wewe.
Tutaongea hiyo tukiendelea. But thank you for inviting me.
Karibu sana. Thank you for coming also. Tinafaa tuongee saizi because we need to learn lessons from people who lose elections and people who win elections. And I also feel as we are moving forward in the National Dialogue Committee, we should maybe look for a way in which we're going to handle people, election losers. What do you think?
Thank you, Esther, for inviting me and for the question that you brought on board. I think it's true that in the last general election, I was a candidate for member of county assembly in Migori County. Went all the way through till the D-Day of the elections. Elections were done. Those who won. Some of us did not have enough votes to be declared winners. And therefore, I think there is still a problem in our country as far as elections are concerned. Not so many people have trust in our electoral process. A lot of times people go into an election and they're not so sure about the outcomes of the elections, because sometimes there are always perception that this election has already been predetermined. And that does not only happen at the national level, because that is what is most visible to most Kenyans, the presidential elections. But I can tell you for a fact that most candidates in elections normally feel disgruntled, even up to the level of member of county assembly, because nobody's ever assured that the elections will be fair, transparent, and verifiable. And therefore, you'll not see so many cases of many people decrying of losing elections at those lower levels, because, of course, again, the challenges of following through, petitioning, and going into the courts to seek for justice is quite expensive in this country.
And most of them historically are generally unsuccessful.
Yeah, and most of them are unsuccessful again. So most of the people, you'll see them after elections, yes, you might have not lost fairly, but you'll just shy away from exploring the other alternative, which is the judicial system, and stay away and just focus on the next election. So I think there's still a lot of mistrust in our electoral system, and a lot of people, even candidates, do not still have the confidence of going into an election, because you are not guaranteed about fairness, about accountability, and about verifiability of these elections that are conducted in this country.
But ladies and gentlemen, keep interacting with me. Share in your comments, share in your questions, share in your concerns. But as Elvis has said, do not be scared to throw yourself into the political field to look for the elective positions. And Wakili, coming to you, here at this point, we do not have an electoral body in Kenya, do we?
We don't have one.
Is this a constitutional crisis?
It is indeed a constitutional crisis, because if we were thrown into a situation where an election is needed, we shall not be in position to carry out that election.
Does that include by-elections?
It includes by-election, because remember, it is the commission which is supposed to conduct an election.
Yes.
And the commission is not the secretariat. The commission are the commissioners. And to take you further, during the BBI litigation, one of the questions that was to be answered was whether IEBC was properly constituted in terms of quorum to be able to carry out a referendum. And the discussion was whether the quorum composed of 3 commissioners or 5 commissioners. At that time, IEBC had 3 commissioners, and people were arguing that the statute talks about 5 commissioners, and the constitution talks about 3 commissioners, or vice versa. And now we are in a worse situation, because we have 0 commissioners, meaning in a by-election, the commission is not properly structured to take any decision pertaining an election. And anything can happen. Let us say the president, if the president were to collapse dead, God forbid.
God forbid.
And the deputy president on the way to the Leaf Funeral Home collapsed dead, God forbid. The Speaker of the National Assembly will act for a specific number of days, after which, by operation of law, there shall be need for a general election.
That's 90 days.
90 days to elect a president. So if what I have said happens and the Speaker acts for 90 days, we shall run into a constitutional crisis after 90 days. We do not have a president, we do not have a government, and we cannot go into an election. Same can happen to the counties, where, for instance, a governor can be impeached. And in the process, the deputy governor takes over, is also impeached. And the Speaker of the County Assembly takes over for a maximum of 60 days. And after that, we cannot carry out an election in that particular county. So the issue of IEBC reconstitution is an urgent matter. It's a matter that should concern every right-thinking Kenyan. In the event of a crisis, in the event of a by-election, we cannot be in position to do that because we have no commissioners at all.
Oh, well said. And the IEBC stalemate is one of the points of discussion in the national dialogue. Coming to the national dialogue, what is the general feeling about the national dialogue as at now? Because we've seen side talks from the members of parliament, not members of parliament, the stakeholders involved. We've had comments like from Kimani Ichung'wah saying, "Nyinyi endeni Kasarani, we don't want live shows." But I'm happy to note that yesterday I noted at least sobriety within the commission. And what do you feel as at now is the status of the National Dialogue Commission?
I think we are headed in the right direction, and politicians must always give dialogue a chance. We cannot solve our problems by way of street protests, by shedding blood of innocent Kenyans through police brutality and other issues. It is the general policy of the community of nations that there is no crisis which cannot be solved by way of mediation. And the national dialogue through bipartisan talks is the way to go. And what we are experiencing, I would call it reckless talks from the political ends, divides, is normal in mediation. In a mediation process, parties do not have to come to the table politely because these are parties that are in acrimony of some sort, parties that are not in agreement. So you don't expect them to come singing and smiling at each other. The temperatures at the beginning of any mediation are as high as we are experiencing in the ongoing talks. But as the talks take shape, the temperatures go down. And you've seen from yesterday,
Yes.
there seems to be some degree of sobriety
Yes.
from both ends. You saw Honorable Pio Wandai and Honorable Ichung'wah Kimani, the leaders of the majority and minorities respectively, agreeing for the first time on the floor on the need to anchor the talks in law so that whatever is resolved is backed by law and can be implemented by the law. This is a good step going forward.
Okay.
All we would like to urge Kenyans and the political divide and elites not to undermine the talks as they are going on. We have reached a level now where the president has to tone down regarding the talks, and the Right Honorable Prime Minister Emeritus and his team too have to tone down and give dialogue a chance. But if you are dialoguing on ultimatums, you are dialoguing and you are saying that this dialogue cannot extend beyond the handshake. This dialogue cannot extend beyond people joining government. And on the other end, you are dialoguing and saying that in this dialogue, it must go this way. That is not the way to go. The spirit of dialogue is the spirit of give and take. And if there is anything that we can learn from our past experience, is the experience we had in 2007-2008 presidential election that was highly disputed and solved by way of barbaric means, leading to loss of thousands of innocent lives in Kenya. Were it not for Kofi Annan, this country would have disintegrated into a failed nation. So Kofi Annan is dead, but his spirit is living, and this spirit must live and be present in the dialogue teams as we proceed with
Exactly. The spirit must lead on. Frederick Maura, I see you saying you're locked on watching from Kino Old House Resort. Keep on sending your comments and interacting with us. This is going to be a very wonderful and informative conversation. And as Wakili has mentioned, that the dialogue committee has been discussed in Parliament, sponsored by the majority and the minority leader, that for once at least they agreed on something to entrench the National Dialogue Committee into the law, so that its resolutions are backed by law, and also to set a timeline on which the tasks should be concluded. Now, this committee that they're talking about will consist of 4 parliamentarians, 4 non-parliamentarians, the majority and the minority leader. Supposing this happens, Wambura, what should be the agenda of the items in the committee? What do you think should be the items in the committee?
Well, I think as we've observed from before, and I'll first of all start by agreeing by my fellow panelists about having this chance to dialogue. I think that is the best way to go as a country, because I think solving political issues through the street process was doing more harm to this country than good. And therefore, I think we are moving in the right direction in terms of the dialogue. And the only challenge that has been there when we look at these talks is we had the talks being initiated previously, then they went on and met some dead end. Then again, we have now reconstituted a new team that now encompasses the different perspectives that both sides were looking at. And the other thing that most Kenyans have been worried about was the scope of the discussions. You well remember when this information came out, the Kenya Kwanza team had their scope of issues that they raised that were supposed to be discussed, and these later were disputed by the Azimio team that that was not their position. They had a different set of agenda that they were proposing for this kind of discussion. But the biggest elephant in the room in this whole discussion, I think the stalemate that was experienced briefly after the announcement of the current president was more political. And so I think beyond speaking about other issues, which of course the economic recovery of the country is important, we should also look at how we can solve the political stalemate that always happens after every election year.
Yes, and that is the elephant in the room.
That is the elephant in the room.
And we always keep it under the carpet.
And that is what we always keep under the carpet and hide under other issues that that come up just to support the discussions. But the elephant in the room is the political landscape that happens each and every after 5 years. That one we have to sort, and I believe and I hope that this team that has been constituted can also have a deep look into it and see how we can address. Because I think even as we were moving into the general election in 2022, there was this discussion about how we can reconstitute our electoral process, plus whether we need to expand the space for leadership, accommodate other positions like the Prime Cabinet Secretary, to just try and be more inclusive of all the communities. But I don't think we can be able to necessarily achieve all that. But if they can come down and discuss on a best strategy to ensure that after every election, then we have an end to an election, so that we don't waste another 1 year into still talking about politics of the previous year and focus on now economic recovery measures. I think that would be the most ideal point of discussion at this level. And of course, other issues now can come in, the cost of living and any other issues that may be discussed at this level. But I think this team should come up with a clear strategy on how we can end this continuous stalemate around the political landscape of this country after every 5 years.
All right. Well said, Susan Kinyua. I see your comments. Thank you for tuning in. Paul Bunyao says, keeping myself updated as I travel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Share this live broadcast so that it can reach as many people at one time. And coming to you, Wakili, as he has said that, what are your thoughts about the agenda items for this committee? Because this committee is kind of giving a glimpse of hope for the constitutional settlements that we are facing. What do you think should be agendas in this National Dialogue Committee?
I think the agenda items, in my opinion, And both parties could be getting it wrong because they are coming from a very emotive background. We should, as a matter of fact and law, limit the agenda of these talks to issues that can be implemented and can be discussed within the parameters of the law. I will pick one item, for example. When Kimani Ichung'wah says we discuss the two-thirds gender rule, that is already in law. The Constitution has stated in black and white that membership of elective agencies, the assemblies at national and county level, not more than two-thirds should be of the same gender. This does not require any further reform. What is required is for the two principles to marshal their support in parliament and implement it. And say, if this parliament is not compliant, let us dissolve it. Remember the Maraga decision, which said that the 12th parliament was not compliant. And therefore, the President Uhuru Kenyatta, as he then was advised to dissolve it from compliance. The president at that time did not dissolve it. We actually have a decision from the Supreme Court that if Parliament is not compliant, the president should proceed and dissolve it. You do not have to go to bipartisan talks to understand the meaning of that provision in law and the reading of the Supreme Court judgment. Let us go to what Azimio is saying, the cost of living. You cannot reduce the cost of living by way of bipartisan talks.
What if they have better ideas? Because cost of living is connected to policy issues. If the policies are Kenya Kwanza's policies, they can listen to the other side. What policies they have and merge them together.
But you cannot legislate and say there should be a reduction in the cost of living. Azimio is in parliament. We have a minority in parliament. What are they doing in terms of bringing alternative proposals, alternative legislation that can help government reduce the cost of living? We have the court processes. How many cases has Azimio filed in court with a view of compelling government to do certain things that will reduce the cost of living? Asking government to reduce the cost of living and telling Kenyans that the bipartisan talks shall reduce cost of living is like promising Kenyans that you will deliver the head of John the Baptist. So what should concern us more is, one, the independence of institutions. You know, the cost of living is high because I believe Parliament has lost its role in terms of oversight. Today, members of Parliament look at themselves as either being Kenya Kwanza or being Azimio. Yet our Constitution does not provide for such divisions in the House. In fact, the roles of members of Parliament are outlined collectively under Article 94 and Article 95 of the Constitution. Members of the Kenya Kwanza, including Ichung'wah, by the Constitution, should be able to criticize government and to tell the president in no uncertain times when the president is doing something that is wrong. Members of the opposition have an obligation to tell the Right Honorable Prime Minister Emeritus that what you are doing, what you are advising your followers to do is wrong and is compromising our constitution. But look at Parliament. It's sharply divided between the two political divides. Members no longer discuss objectively. They have put on the lenses of political parties, the lenses of ethnic affiliations, so that when Raila has said something as an MP, I must support him because I'm from Western Kenya or Luo Nyanza. When Ruto says, I must do this, that is not the way to go. So we must secure Parliament, ensure that through these talks, Parliament is more independent. How do we secure it? How do we enforce party discipline? The law is very clear that when a member of a political party promotes the ideals of another political party or crosses over, then that member ceases to be a member of the party, hence subjected to a by-election. The way Jaramogi did in 1966, when he differed with Kenyatta, he resigned as MP and his group of MPs resigned Kenapolngei, and they went into an election and they were elected on KPU. Raila Odinga, when he differed with Wamalwa Kijana over leadership of Ford Kenya, he resigned from Ford Kenya, went to NDP and went into a by-election, and he won that by-election. What is happening today is that there is an uncalled for rush by members of parliament elected on opposition tickets to rush to government.
Yes, they rushed to government.
In
and
the
you
name
saw
of
what
development.
happened. Development. You saw what happened after the elections. Azimio had the numbers. True or false?
True.
They had the numbers, but many of the political parties that were merged as Azimio went to join. They went to State House, and then they said, we are going to look for development. And now Azimio lost the numbers, and now there's no accountability for the political parties that did not follow the guidelines of the Political Parties Act, and for those who need to be subjected to by-elections. And here we are, life is going on as usual.
But who told these members of parliament that development is gotten from State House? You know, a government has a constitutional and moral obligation to develop all regions irrespective of the political affiliations of the citizens or their representation. So there's nothing as going to government so that to get development. I think people rushing to government are rushing for personal gain. Once we've reformed the political parties in this Kenya and instilled discipline, we must go for the IEBC, reconstitution of the IEBC. But you remember, we cannot be talking about IEBC every election cycle.
Yes.
We must say and interrogate amongst ourselves what is wrong with the composition of IEBC, so that after every election, we are saying that the commissioners were compromised.
Yes.
Once we've reformed IEBC, we need to reform the judiciary. If the judiciary is reformed, and I am an advocate of the High Court, and I am very happy the way the law has protected the judiciary, and our judiciary is functionally independent. But we have an English lord who said that justice should not just be done, but justice should be seen to be done. Whereas I agree with the ruling of the Supreme Court declaring that the President William Ruto was validly elected based on the reasoning in the judgment, I take issue with the language of the Chief Justice when he was addressing counsel for the Azimio, and the untidy language and the harsh language, it just depresses an already depressed heart. Why are our judges at that high level of representation so willing to please the executive by using unpalatable terms even where they're not required? Having reformed the judiciary is 70% independent, 70% compliant. Of course, we have a few elements that need to be reformed. Having done that, we must look into the police force, because we moved from a police force to a police service. And a police service is not supposed to meet violence against the citizens of a country. Under our Constitution, Article 1, citizens are supreme. The sovereignty of the people is supreme. And the people are higher than the police force. So we should have a police force that is a service, a police force that should supervise demonstrations without shedding any blood. Remember, government has a monopoly over all instruments of violence. And the police cannot tell Kenyans that we were killing because they were uprooting the railway, because they were interfering with the expressway. They have the machinery to stop that interference without necessarily shedding blood.
All right. Send in your questions because we have a well of knowledge in today. Anything that you'd want addressed, send in. Valentine Wende says, great conversation. Thank you for tuning in. SK Melvin says, amazing conversation. I'm locked in. Thank you. Keep on sharing the live broadcast. Send in your questions, comments, and concerns. Paul Munyao says, the parliament should be candid on how the executive is conducting its business. Look at how KRA interprets the finance bill and starts to calculate the housing tax using gross salary instead of basic. And that is a question we're going to talk about, of course, in this conversation as we go on. And now we are looking at the 8th Devolution Conference that is happening in Uasin Gishu County in Eldoret. Why have you not attended it, Elvis?
That's a very interesting question. First of all, I think the Devolution Conference is a conference that has not just started today. We've been having these conferences year and year.
Yeah, this is the 8th one.
This is the 8th one now. But looking at devolution still, I'm sad to say that we've not really achieved as much as a country. Every other time you'll hear county governments complain about the disbursement of funds.
Yes.
They come in, agree with the national government on a certain ratio, but at the end of the day, you'll always hear county governments complaining that we've not been able to receive the amount of share that we have agreed on.
And none of the counties have ever reached their target.
And none of the counties has ever reached their targets again.
Yes.
When you go back to the counties, service delivery has, in as much as yes, there's some good aspects of what the county has been able to do, but you can still look at, for example, the healthcare system at the county level. Go into the local dispensaries in any county, and you'll still find that there's a shortage of drugs. You'll still find that there are no medical officers to attend to patients, and you still find a host of many problems. A lot of what is being done at the county levels is just infrastructural development, and without matching the infrastructural development with the labor force and with the facilities that are needed for it to be very functional. And so, as much as some bits of the counties have been achieved, but there's a lot of gaps still in terms of achieving the intended objectives, because at this time, we shouldn't be talking about a failed healthcare system, for example, in this country. And you've seen even doctors coming on board and complaining and wanting to go back to the national government management. So this devolution conference, I believe that every devolution conference normally has outcomes that are discussed and agreed upon by the different parties, because the devolution conference brings different parties from national government, county government, development partners, and many other stakeholders involved. The issue at hand is the implementation of these outcomes. Where does it end? Because that is where we need to focus on. Instead of doing so many conferences that have clear-cut outcomes that are supposed to be implemented after each cycle of devolution conference, what is it that happens after that? Do we just do a very flashy conference, have people come? A lot of money is, by the way, invested into this devolution conference. When you look at the caliber of people who have attended, all these people have gone there, have gotten, if they're government officials, they have their per diems, they have their accommodation taken care of, they have everything taken care of for the entire of this week, just to spend the time there, talk about matters devolution. But again, what is the net effect at the end of that conference? Will we have just spent a lot of money to just do a flashy conference and please the eyeballs and every other body, but end the conference with very good documents, outcome documents that are well put, but then go down and keep them in shelves in the offices? I think that is that should be the biggest question. What is the end result out of each devolution conference? Have we been able to see any steps being taken after devolution conference? Because I know, even in this one, you will see the issue about disbursement of funds being discussed. But it won't take another 2 months before you hear counties decrying of failure of the national government to disburse funds. And you'll not even hear about the national government saying that counties have not met their targets. You'll see the Auditor General talking about mismanagement of funds at the county level. 10 years later, after devolution, we should be actually seeing the capacity of county governments increasing. But when each and every other time you listen to reports and see that counties have not met their targets, counties have been mismanaging funds allocated to them, then it beats a logic to get to know what is then the essence of this. So I think we should focus more on the outcomes after this devolution conference. And we should be going into the next devolution conference after scrutinizing and seeing that the outcomes that were discussed or the outcomes out of the 8th devolution conference have been achieved when we go into the 9th devolution conference. Otherwise, we'll just be doing flash events, keeping the public glued to their screens, trying to follow up and seeing what is happening.
And
but we will not
shows.
have anything at the end of it. We'll just go back with pockets full of per diems and everything. And the local mwananchi will still continue suffering at the local level, no impact, and nothing changes after that.
Wakili, do you agree that, because do you mean to say that the devolution conference sounds like a mere talk show? Because the legislators, I was with the senator for Vihiga County, and he said it's a mere talk show where people just go to speak and speak and speak. Ledama Olikina on his Twitter said that I will not be attending because it's just a flashy event of boys and girls who are going to show off themselves.
Results. Out of this devolution conference, what have we seen?
What are we gaining?
Many years later, out of 8 devolution conferences,
Yes.
have we been able to see steps beyond what we are having? The issues that are discussed are same issues. And so that is the logic of why do we have to do all this? And you remember, for example, besides the devolution conference, there was a time where our president questioned about the COPs, the COP28, these climate conferences.
Yes.
Why do we keep on doing these things if we can't see results? So same to the devolution conference. Why do we keep on doing the conferences, spending a lot of money,
and
yet
we are talking
not
about
seeing any results?
Measures in the
Sure,
same country.
that's the thing. That's the question.
To you, Wakili, what is your thoughts about the state of devolution? What do you think about the devolution conference, and what is the expectation of the conference?
I think we need to rethink the objectives of devolution and our constitution. When Kenyans enacted Chapter 11 of the Constitution on devolution, in their minds, they had thought of decentralization of political power so that we don't concentrate political power at the presidency at the national level. But most importantly, decentralization of resources. We take resources from Nairobi back to the villages. Is it the same spirit that still lives to date? My answer is in the negative. Whereas we can see tremendous changes that have been brought about by devolution, I think what we have lost could be more, and we are losing more. Devolution conference is merely a waste of time and a waste of public resources. When this conference was in Kakamega last time, His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta then did not attend. However, he gave his address via virtual link. And the governors and all attendees sat for about 15 minutes listening to the president. And my question would be, wasn't that a lesson that we can have virtual devolution conferences to save on resources?
Exactly.
If you will be told the cost of that devolution conference, you will not believe. Each of the 47 counties is going to spend more than 100 million on that devolution conference.
Wow.
And then there shall be no clear-cut outcomes that will be able to restore back the resources to the counties.
Does the 100 million include the per diems for...
Yes, per diems for the governors, per diems for the staffs of the counties. Each county has about 10 departments. Each department sends about 20 people. Those are 200 people on heavy per diems. In fact, 100 million will be on the lower side. So we are going to spend close to 5 billion in Eldoret in the name of a devolution conference, when this 5 billion would have been used effectively to change a facet in this country, to improve our healthcare system. A county governor has carried 200 delegates to the devolution conference, spending 200 million, and the same governor is unable to equip drugs in their county and some county hospitals. The same governor is unable to put up ECD centers. The same governor is unable to subsidize the cost of fertilizer to improve agriculture in their counties. What is the priority? The priority should be to decentralize resources so that the common man can feel you do not have to go to Nairobi for you to be successful. Remember, when we were growing up as young children, Nairobi was one of the sources of success.
Yes.
When you hear someone has gone to Nairobi, that person becomes
successful.
rich and is very successful. And all of us had an ambition to go to Nairobi. Because of devolution, Kakamega should be like Nairobi. Busia should be like Nairobi. But I think personal interests have taken over. What we should be asking today is how do we address runaway corruption in the counties? How do we address runaway wastage of public resources? You cannot carry delegates all the way from Teso South in Busia to come to Nakuru, to Sawela, to discuss the hunger situation, and they are using about 20 million to
Imagine.
discuss the hunger situation in Teso, when the 20 million would have saved lives by buying food to the starving generations. So we must rethink the way of doing things as
Or
a country.
equipment in hospitals.
Equipment in hospitals.
Yes.
So it is high time that we do away with the devolution conferences and come up with a better conference that is less costly and more effective.
Exactly. And I hope this message reaches our legislators in the county governments, our governors, senators, the deputy, and even the deputy president. From our point of view, we do not see the need of the devolution conferences. Billy Elias says, tuned in, great debate. Thank you so much for tuning in. Keep on sharing, sending your comments, send in your questions. And I was also thinking the way you've said that there is no need to carry legislators all the way from Teso to Wasingishu. I really feel what I asked about the challenges that can be addressed, challenges devolution faces that can be addressed. One of these challenges is you can handle those conferences virtually. I was listening to Professor Herman Manyora. He said he's a consultant and he does not see the reason why people have to move from here to Naivasha to go and discuss something, sit in panels and sessions. Yet I think we already have solutions to so many things. What we need to do is to implement them. And there's the issue about the transfer of functions of devolution. Do you feel it has been addressed clearly enough?
It has not been addressed clearly, and I heard the president pledging to complete the transfer of functions in the next...
In his agenda.
In his agenda.
Yes.
The president means well for this country because completing the transfer of functions is part of the obligation of the national government to the county government. But are Kenyans benefiting from this transfer? This transfer talk is coming at a time when some Kenyans are even of the view that functions which are already transferred to the counties, some of them ought to revert back to national government. Health, for example. Health is a basic function of any functional society. When a health system fails, the society dies. And we have counties that are completely unable to address health issues, and their health systems have failed. And these counties depend on the neighboring border counties to treat their patients, to have medicine and other things. If I were a one-man commission formed to look into the transfer of functions from national government to county government, I will stop it and evaluate whether what has been transferred by operation of the law is yielding the desired results. And doctors and nurses will tell you they are better handled by Ministry of Health at national level than being handled by county governments through departmental levels. You've heard doctors saying that you've given us a CEC, the county minister, who is a teacher, to be in charge of this. You've given us a chief officer who is not a technocrat. You remember counties are political creatures that is struggling to cope with bureaucracy and administrative procedures. It was, in my opinion, a very, very big problem to take health to the counties. We had not reached such levels, and that is where you will get some county referral hospitals are not a going concern. They're just deathbeds.
Yeah, including West Pokot. There's been a conversation on Twitter on the state of the health situation in West Pokot. I hear it is very bad. What do you think about transfer of functions from the national to county levels?
Well, I think in the people who came up with the idea, I think meant well for devolution.
Yes.
And for service delivery.
Yes, because ideally,
people.
like health is supposed to work for people at the local
At the local
levels.
level, because each region in this country, I can tell you, have their own challenges, and so devolving these functions was for the good intention. But it has come to a point where 10 years later, we are not seeing the effects taking charge. When you look at, for example, the healthcare system, which was supposed to be localized and, of course, address the issues affecting the local people in each county, because we agree and we accept that not the problems of healthcare in Kisumu might not necessarily be the same as the problem of healthcare in Mombasa, might not be the same in Mandera and elsewhere. When you look at the country, for example, you'll be told that there are areas, for example, where malaria is predominant, and there are areas that malaria is not predominant. So ideally, that area where malaria is predominant should come up with strategies to address that issue. But the capacity of the counties to handle this, the counties have become so politicized that when you look at persons who are even appointed to positions of influence at the county level, looking at maybe chief officers, looking at CECs, they've become just mere political appointees. And to just satisfy maybe is more of a reward system. And therefore, a lot of functions are not going as per envisioned. And so the capacity of these counties to tackle the functions that have been given to them is questionable. And so in as much as there would be need to devolve more, I think it's, in my opinion as well, that we should hold on and still, first of all, do an audit of the capacity of the counties to take up extra functions. If they are already burdened with the functions that they have been given. What would, because I was listening to yesterday a conversation on TV about even agriculture. People saying there are functions that are still held at the national level, and there are functions, and agriculture ideally should be a county function.
Yes.
But again, the question would be, if what is already devolved is not working, why do we need then to increase more into the counties? We should first see the do audit of whether the counties really have the capacity and ascertain their level of competence then to take up more responsibility. You cannot overburden an already overburdened animal. For example, talk about having a donkey which has already sat down due to the burden that is on them, and then again on top of it add another burden. So I think that is an area we need to relook at. Audit, first of all, the capacities of the counties to already utilize or make good use of what they have before thinking about taking extra resources to the counties to still manage.
Yes. And Victor Kiplagat, thank you for tuning in. He says, ask the lawyer why they cannot do away with the Law Society annually meeting if he says that, if he thinks devolution is a waste.
Where I'm attending the annual LSK meeting, which is in Malindi, but I'm attending from Nairobi. It is virtual.
It is virtual.
So tell him it is virtual. We can do
Victor
virtually.
Kiplagat, there is your answer. He says it is virtual. You can do it virtually.
And it is ongoing now, and I've been attending. Even today, I attended.
Oh, great. So I feel the president should go the Magufuli way. You see, Magufuli went into power and really went big on the austerity measures. That is a leaf he should borrow from. And going to the state of the country and the economy, it's 1 year down with the bottom-up economic transformation model. Is it working?
Esther, a lot of Kenyans had high expectations.
Very high expectations.
When this government was coming to power, a lot of Kenyans had very high expectations about the bottom-up economic transformation model. And having in mind that a lot of Kenyans are the low cadre of the pyramid, many of them had high expectations about standards of living improving, cost of living going down. But 1 year later, there's a lot of questions in the minds of Kenyans. When you look at the cost of living, it has consistently been rising. Some of the reasons that have been given by government, of course, Kenyans try to listen to them and make sense out of them, but it doesn't really make sense because what was promised during the campaign period looks like the opposite is now happening after getting into political offices. The cost of living, they promised, for example, the Kenya Kwanza government had promised that this would go down immediately they come into office. We've had scorecards of 100 days, first 100 days in office.
Yes.
A lot was envisioned to be done within 100 days. That was not accomplished. Some were done, some were not done. And so the cost of living has increased, but there's a lot of talk about we have to do this for the future. And so in as much as, yes, the cost of living is high, a lot of Kenyans still have hope in this government that at the end of the day, the measures that the government is putting in place, for example, talk about this, subsidizing production as opposed to subsidizing consumption. Kenyans still have hope that this one will bear fruits at the end of the day. Of course, when you go back into the communities, in the last weekend I was back in the community, And when you look at, for example, the harvest that is expected this year, especially on maize, which is the basic food or basic meal for majority of Kenyans, a lot of them are expecting high harvest this time. And so we are hoping that when we see this and when we experience such harvests, we expect to see a ripple effect on the cost of maize flour, for example, so that it doesn't just end up at farmers doing a very good job, and then ultimately we don't see that relation between increased harvest and lowering the cost of maize flour at the supermarkets, because that has also been a challenge. How do we then take up this, what the farmers have produced, and turn it into an effect that will ultimately result in lower prices for food commodities? That has been the question, because a lot of times a lot of people do a lot of work but does not translate into the end result. So there's still hope, in as much as times are tough. A lot of Kenyans are experiencing high cost of living, high taxation, and everything has risen, the cost of fuel, but there's still hope. A lot of Kenyans are hoping that with this kind of measures that the government has put in place, and the promise that it will eventually work out, we are hopeful that it will actually eventually work out. But it will not take too long. Kamba itakatika at some point. Kenyans are already overstretched, and they are at the bridge of getting broken. And so the government should actually move with speed and go beyond just making promises and promises over promises, and at least address issues that affect the common people, which they promised to sort out.
Yes, they say that cry now, laugh later, but we wonder how long is later. And we see a packet of sugar right now is 1 kg of sugar is 215 shillings. Last I checked. And the prices are rising every day, but the president keeps on making promises every other day. He promised that the dollar rate is going to go down, but it's now at 150 shillings. He's talking about the fertilizers that he has reduced to 2,500. I'm not a farmer. I don't deal in fertilizers, so I don't know how it's going. And Elvis says that there is still hope. But now Busia Senator Okiya Mutata is challenging a ruling by the Court of Appeal that gave a green light to the implementation of the Finance Act. And we've already witnessed the implementation of the Finance Act with the housing levy. It has been backdated to 1st of July. And the ruling will be, and the VAT on fuel from 8 to 16%. The ruling will be passed on 28th of August. Now, what is the possible scenario of supporting the court halts its implementation, yet it's already effective?
One is a normal legal practice that courts will give orders and stay implementation of legislation. It's also normal practice that there could be an appeal at the higher court, and the higher court will lift the orders and allow implementation of legislation. There's also a possibility that the superior court, the most superior court, the apex court, the Supreme Court, will weigh in and say, we are lifting the ruling of the Court of Appeal and reinstating the High Court ruling, staying the implementation of the Act. So what is going on is a normal process. But from a legal point of view, it was wrong. It is legally wrong for government to backdate taxes when at the time of backdating such taxes, that law was not effective in the country. We have never had in law what we call retrogressive implementation of acts. That's something that what ought to have happened last month will happen after passing a law today. Statutes are not retrogressive in nature. They're not supposed to be implemented backward. They are implemented forward. And therefore, Omtata is right, and any court will find merit with Omtata's case that it was wrong to implement and backdate the taxes. However, on the issue of lifting, once they lifted the High Court orders, I think the government was justified legally to implement the act because there was no legal barrier. If the Supreme Court differs with the Court of Appeal and stays the implementation of the act, there will be no taxes based on that act from the time the apex court will make the ruling. And remember, all these are just rulings. We have not had a judgment. The Honorable Chief Justice has put in place a 3-judge bench to hear and determine Okia Omtata's case on its merit. What government has done, a layman is a person who is not properly informed in law, will be asking themselves this question. What if we have this case going on for 1 year, where the Supreme Court has stayed the implementation of the act so that no housing levy is deducted, and then after 1 year, the 3-bench judge says that the act was okay after all. Government proceed and levy that particular housing levy. Does it mean that we shall have a 12-month deduction from the pay slips of those who are earning? And that is how basically wrong the government was. You cannot backdate implementation of a statute, and more so if it's relating to the taxes. And I believe the president must walk his talk on the respect of the rule of law and the independence of institutions. When the president is the chief executive, forget about these KRA people. The president is the head of everything.
Yes.
He's the head of KPLC, the head of KRA, is the chief executive. So when his juniors disobey court orders and do things that are contrary to the spirit of the rule of law, he is actually backtracking on what he had promised Kenyan. He was elected on the basis of his manifesto. And one of his strong pillars to the lovers of justice was his commitment for the respect to the rule of law. Now there is no such respect.
And we've also seen the transfer of judges who have made decisions that have been against the executive, the passing of the doing away with the caste positions, which were contested in court, and the Finance Act. Some of those judges have been given transfers outside town. What do you think about that whole situation? Is it intentional? Is it a form of punishment? What does that message send to us?
As an advocate, I am bound by the reasoning of the statute and what the law says about the transfer of judges. The transfer of judges at the superior court is actually a preserve of the Chief Justice. And that is why I said if we have independent institutions, independent heads of this, including the Chief Justice, they will not do anything that will send a wrong message to Kenyans. Ngure must have, or may have been transferred on the merit and said, you've been in Nairobi this time, now go to Malindi. But what will Kenyans feel if a judge who has given a ruling against government is moved the next day?
Exactly.
And that is why I call upon the Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya to be more careful with the acts in this highly political environment. Kenyans are bound to misinterpret. It is a possibility that Chief Justice was acting in good faith and executing her mandate under law to transfer judges. It's also possible that the Chief Justice was succumbing to political pressure. But did we have a Chief Justice who would be a gatekeeper to government? A Chief Justice who would inquire from the Chief Executive on where to post which judge? And this was happening before, even with Justice Maraga. It's not starting with Koome. There used to be a judge called Odunga at the High Court, Justice George Odunga at the High Court, who was whose judgments were termed to be anti-government. And one time, Lord of Majority Aden Duale was heard warning him on press and telling him that, oh, Odunga, you've been issuing, you are a Raila person, you are Raila's cousin. And Maraga moved Odunga from Milimani Constitutional Division up to Machakos. Wow. And you know, government litigation takes place in Milimani. So the Chief Justice can sink that law and plant judges who are friendly to the executive, the national executive, to act as gatekeepers, so that if something comes against government, these friendly judges put it aside. We're not saying that she's doing this, but the national outcry about the transfer of the judge who stopped the finance bill should act as a lesson to the Chief Justice on the timing of the transfer of judges. and the circumstances under which a judge ought to be transferred. And perhaps Parliament, as part of the bipartisan talks, should consider taking that responsibility of the transfer of judges from the Chief Justice and giving it to the Judicial Service Commission, because Judicial Service Commission has a membership that is not wholly inclined on one side. So that the Chief Justice, as the CEO of the institution, can only make proposals which ought to be ratified by a full commission. That way, we shall save the judiciary. But if this one has been transferred because she ruled against finance bill, those who remained and do not want to go to Kitui on transfer or Busia on transfer will basically be asking the Chief Justice, we have this case before us, your ladyship. How can we rule it so that you maintain us in Nairobi? And that defeats the purpose of judicial independence.
Wow, that's a lot of knowledge there. Alex Mwangi says, logged in, interesting conversation. Evans Kiuna says, good chat, thank you. I'll be asking your questions at the end, Evans Kiuna. Elvis, coming to you. There's a tweet by Ndugu Haron that says, first there is the introduction of the stabilization fund. And now we are hearing about the stabilization fund to cushion the VAT, to cushion the taxes that have been laid on fuel. And now someone says, ati sasa wanaita fuel stabilizer, ata mkiita fuel equilibrium, ama fuel symmetry, tutajua tu ni fuel subsidies. And you know, Kenyans are following up with a conversation that, with a statement that the president said that he's not going to work with subsidies. So what is this stabilization fund and what is the subsidies? Where is the clear difference, or are they the same thing?
We have been treated to scenarios where different terms are used to mean the same things. And so we wouldn't be surprised if the stabilization still means the same as subsidy. I think the government is very careful in choosing the kind of terms that they use. Remember from the time of housing levy, then later on it came out clear that it was a housing tax. And now from a stabilizer to now subsidy, that is something that we are waiting to see. But one thing that is clear is that the choice of words is always very creative, so that it doesn't appear like they are going back on their own words. And so when this discussion about fuel stabilizer fund is coming up, I think what we are in agreement as a country is that the cost of fuel has gone so high. And the cost of fuel then has a ripple effect on production of every kind. And this has made life so expensive. And I think that is the background against which this stabilizer fund is coming on board, to try and cushion what already is ailing, a sector that is already ailing. Because we've seen a lot of effects, including closing down of businesses, shutting down of factories, and even so many other people. Even car owners now are afraid of using their cars because of the cost of fuel. People are resorting to different ways of operation. So that brings the question. The government has also put on the table the issue about using alternative sources of energy. For example, in the motor industry, they're talking about using electric cars. Where does this stop at? Because if that is the direction that they had envisioned to take us into, then why not take it up? The president the other day had promised, for example, the border riders, that we will now be having electric motorcycles that will cut down on the need for fuel. Because I think importation of fuel, as has been put, has been the highest burden to this country. Because the importation then has an effect on the dollar. And that, you remember, some few months ago, we had a challenge of our reserves of dollar reserves going below the expected limits. And it was pegged on the reasoning that a lot of our production is pegged on fuel. So is it a time that then we should shift away from that and even avoid those stabilization funds and subsidies and refocus on other sustainable measures, if that is the way to go? So I think that is the whole discussion around this fund. But I think it's just another way of curating words and being creative around words and introducing the same thing to cure a problem that is already ailing a country.
The general thought of the Kenyan is that the president has now calmed down. He has taken a different stance from the one he said that he's not going to work with subsidies, but now he has been forced to because he has to regulate the prices of commodities in the country. John Kiama asks, Wakili, what are your thoughts on the he says, what are your thoughts on the introduced fuel subsidy on the Kenyan government?
Very well. I am a lover of literature, and William Shakespeare, in one of his plays, Romeo and Juliet, asks, what is in a name? That which we call a rose will smell as same, even if it had another name. So that which we call the stabilizing fund will serve the same function, even if it was called subsidies. So the president has basically, and Kenyans refer to him as Zakayo in good faith, he has climbed down the tree and is ready to meet Jesus. By introducing stabilizing fund, he's going back to where Uhuru left him on subsidies. Remember, the problems we are facing are not uniquely Kenyan problems.
True.
These problems are in Uganda, Tanzania, and as a result of the global trends. And Uhuru had cushioned Kenyans because of the subsidies. What the president has done is good, but it is not good in the long run. In the long run, government must come up with policies that will subsidize production and not consumption or not the output. One of the things that the president has done, and they say Mugala muwe na haki umpe, is the subsidy on fertilizers. It may appear like is a PR gimmick, but I have been in about 3-4 counties in Western Kenya where the fertilizer has arrived at a subsidized, in fact, at half price at 2,500, and people are getting. The only problem is that the fertilizer is not able to even serve a third of farmers within a sub-county. If we can increase the subsidies on production, like subsidies on fertilizers, subsidies on fuel, and the president is in a very good position because he's almost doubling the taxes. The taxes that Uhuru left us with are not the same taxes that we are paying. Where is this money going? This overtaxation, if it is being tolerated by Kenyans, should be going to the agenda that will, in the long term, ensure Kenyans are able to afford their daily lives without subsidies. But if we are being overtaxed as a nation and money is going in the hands of few individuals, we are going to depend on these subsidies for a long time, and there shall come a time when the executive shall be unable to meet the subsidies. One of the things that the president is going through as a difficult moment is perhaps the competence of his government. And he has admitted it. When he addressed cabinet during performance contracting, he said that in his cabinet, he has ministers and principal secretaries who do not understand what is going on in government. How will such bureaucrats lead you in leading a nation out of an economic turmoil to economic prosperity? And Taifa Leo reported a bit subtly and derogatory. He said, mawaziri mbumbumbu. You know, mbumbumbu is a Kiswahili term
Clueless.
that means clueless, rudderless, motion. People cannot do anything. And look at the careless statements that ministers have been throwing left, right. Nakumicha, instead of addressing the shortage of consultants at Kenyatta Hospital or Kijabe Hospital, is busy yelling in Trans Nzoia over the transfer of an OCS, something she knows that cannot be done by an executive order that she purports to give. The Kindiki Kithure is busy contradicting Eliud Owalo on this, is it Bitcoin? WorldCoin. Yes, because Owalo is saying, you know, these WorldCoin people are fully registered in Kenya, is a good organization, and we've allowed them to work. Kindiki, from another location in Nairobi, is saying, we do not know how these fellas are operating, and thus we are stopping the operation. So we need to have a government that works as a team, a government that works in unison, and a government that is dominated by highly professional
Professionals,
bureaucrats who
yes.
can drive the president's agenda. And this frustrates the president. I may not have voted for him, but he is on a just course to reform our economy, to reform our society. But the team that is leading the president into this, by his own admission, is largely clueless, largely rudderless, and not focused on anything. So his first call should be to sit, have a meeting with himself. It is 1 year down the line, and evaluate each appointment that he has made over the past 1 year, and whether that appointment is profitable.
Exactly.
If it's not profitable, he should bring to government men and women who can do the job and help him drive the Kenya Kwanza agenda for the next 5 years before he comes back to Kenyans for a second evaluation.
Exactly. His hands are not tied. And to you, Akili, again, just looking at the state of the country and the economy, the government has allowed each of the 32 public universities to determine their own respective fees for them to raise their own operations. Now, there's a new funding model that requires and there's a new funding model that has been set up to receive funds from the treasury, from the exchequer to the new funding model in the universities. What is your thought about this in the state of the universities in Kenya?
I think the Presidential Working Committee on Education Reforms got it wrong, especially on the universities. One, right to education is a right under Article 43 of our Constitution, that every person has a right to education. When you leave universities to determine their own fees, they commercialize educations, and universities now become profit-making institutions. That was not the desire of a university. That was not the purpose for which universities are established. And when you do that, quality of education goes low, because quality of education will education will also only be affordable to those who can afford it, to the rich. We are excluding children of the poor with a good brain from attending university because the fees have been tripled. Even for the qualifying students, the people we used to call the JAB students, those of Joint Admission Board, those of Kenya universities, colleges, central placement services, they are no longer funded. You got an A from Musoli girls or an A- from Butere girls, you are given a letter to go and study medicine, and the fee structure they are telling you one semester is $500,000. So from a humble village in Huisero, you must raise $500,000 to report at Chiromo as you await for government funding. The government has introduced a new funding model which says students will now be categorized into the needy, the less needy, the vulnerable, and I think the able. How are we going to classify these children? P1 teachers, primary school teachers, for instance, will not qualify to be vulnerable, will not qualify to be even needy. At the very best, they may qualify to be called less needy. Remember, you are a P1 teacher earning 19,000 a month. Your husband is earning 19,000 a month. You are on loans. You have 6 children in the university, and you are supposed to use the cumulative 38,000 a month, which is less than 1 million a year to pay for all these children. So you could be working, but you are vulnerable. But government is going to reduce funding to a very small segment of the university. In fact, the new funding model, as proposed by the president and adopted by the working committee, seeks to transfer the burden of education on the Kenyan parents. We are going to compromise on quality. We are going to compromise on access. And a person can go before the African Court of Justice and petition the government of Kenya, so the government of Kenya, for violating the people's right to education. You do not commercialize an education system of a country as a means of excluding the children of the poor from accessing the education that they want. Under this model, villages will no longer produce advocates. villages will no longer produce doctors, medical doctors, or engineers. It's only the well-off families that are going to be able to pay for their children in the institutions of higher learning.
Well said. And finishing up the show, Elvis, I have 3 questions for you from Evans Kiuna. He asks, should governors implement their own manifestos or that of the sitting government? And how can ministries at the county engage the national level to the extent that national government sets policy to make it responsive to people's needs?
Well, to respond to that, I think every leader who gets into office always has a manifesto. For governors, for example, a governor before running for office has clearly put out or set out manifesto of what he needs to do to address the challenges that the people in that particular county face. And it's imperative for the governor to get into office and implement the manifesto, because I believe no one goes to run for office without doing a background check of the issues that affect the people in that particular county. To add on that, after a governor is elected, in every cycle of 5 years, there is what is called the County Integrated Development Plan, which is the CIDP, which then translates the manifesto into actionable policies that can now implement what was envisioned in the manifesto of the governor. And this is always done through public participation, and is even approved through the county assemblies, and is now a document that is able to be implemented. And so I think it goes down into the governor going back into implementing what they promised, because there's no need of coming up with a manifesto, which I believe is informed by a research of some sort, and then getting into office and implementing totally different things. And that has been the case in most cases in this country. Many people go into elections with very good manifesto that are promising heaven to Kenyans, but immediately after getting into office, then there comes a totally different person that people never recognize. So I think it's very important that a governor elected, or whichever political leader is elected, implements the manifesto and implements the agenda. Of course, there's always the national government agenda, but there's a way that the national government and county governments work. They don't work in isolation, so there's a way they can always align to ensure that the objects of that governor, because it's more local, are also met through the manifesto and through now the CIDP that every county has. And this is always even reviewed through their annual development plans, that where now governors can be able to incorporate other issues as they come to during their term of office.
All right. And what do you think, finally, what do you think about the bill that was introduced yesterday to Parliament to impose a ban on TikTok?
Personally, I think one of the sites that I have not registered is TikTok.
Why?
But,
because you're a man. They say
no.
don't use TikTok.
I think that is one social media site that I've honestly not registered. I'm not registered on. But I think to introduce a bill to ban TikTok, I don't think I would support. Because in this country, a lot of people, especially young people, are unemployed. And social media has provided an avenue for most of the young people to create or to earn a living out of. A lot of young people on TikTok, some of them, in as much as there's been a lot of talk, and of course, even if it were to be banned in Kenya, this is not the first country. There are countries that have already banned TikTok. Exactly. The issues that we should look at is how to regulate TikTok and not to ban it entirely. Mm-hmm. Because when you ban TikTok, there's this young lady who sells their clothes on TikTok and earns a living. Mm-hmm. You'll have excluded her. There's this young man who does his artwork and sells it through TikTok. You'll have interfered with this young man. There are so many people, different professions. You even saw a story sometime on Citizen, I think, of a lady who was assisting the mother in, I think they are cobblers or something, and they were selling that so much through TikTok. So in as much as there are those negative aspects of TikTok that have been widely spoken about, especially during midnights and the wee hours, the ungodly hours of the night, I think we need to just look at how we can regulate the use of TikTok instead of just thinking about banning it. Because banning it will be locking out many young people who are currently unemployed, who have not been given opportunities to I was looking at, for example, some meme today. A young man who was saying they have studied up to university, done their masters, done their everything, and then with all that knowledge, they have gone back to the village to teach in a primary school a subject called CRE, to just earn a living. So there's already a lot of pressure out here. There are no jobs. And so if there are avenues that young people, and social media has proven to be one of the avenues that many young people are using, talk about doing a lot of things, not only in TikTok, you can talk about Facebook, Instagram, and even YouTube. I think we shouldn't think about avenues of locking out these platforms, but just regulating so that their use is monitored and that it does not lead into other content that is not acceptable in the society.
All right. Your thoughts, Wakili? Parting shots, salamu?
Thank you. First, I must protect the TikTokers. I'm not a TikToker. But I think the older generation should give a younger generation space to live. If they wasted their time and the younger generation is quite innovative, let them not make punitive laws against younger generation. How has TikTok stopped anyone from doing their daily businesses, from pursuing? And like my brother has said, let us look at TikTok beyond what we see on the screen and look at how we can make TikTok more beneficial in our agenda to transform our country. It's a very popular site. We can use it for business. We can use it for education. In the next 30 years, we are going to teach our learners through TikTok. You are seated in the lecture room waiting for the lecturer. Instead of lecturer coming, we just record our TikTok and we send you so that you watch and understand. Otherwise, thank you. It has been my pleasure coming to this particular show. I have enjoyed, and I hope Kenyans have enjoyed, and we shall continue this dialogue.
I'm sure they have. Your parting shots, Elvis?
Just to say thank you so much for the invite. I believe these are conversations that should not end here. These are conversations that should be taken up many times, and to just also ask the government to have some mercy on young people. Young people are trying to survive these tough economic times that we have. The young people are trying to survive the unemployment that is currently high. A lot of them are actually on depression as we speak because they cannot be able to sustain their livelihoods. Some young people are even afraid to get married because if you cannot sustain yourself, how then would you be able to afford and support an extra person? So I think we just need to relook at how we are targeting young people, and instead of attacking them in every innovative way they come up with, the government should look at ways of encouraging them and supporting their work so that they are able to sustain themselves and take up responsibilities and move this nation to the next level that we envision. Because young people are the majority and they bear the biggest burden of anything that will end up affecting this country.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to my guests who are here. Thank you for your output to the show. And thank you for all of you who have joined the show. Thank you for your interactions. And we're usually here every Monday and Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. You can catch us here. And if you missed the live show and you'd want to follow it up, you follow on Esther Nyonje on YouTube and you will find it there. And until next time, God bless you and stay safe. The temperatures are rising by day.
Hawa nitawakalia ngumu.
The drums keep beating.
I want to reiterate once again here.
As the direction of the wind changes.
Azimio is not interested in handshake.
And we keep playing. Games aside, what's in for Mwananchi? We keep this conversation flowing so you are up to date, knowledgeable and fully aware of your political and socio-economic environment. Do not be left in the dark. Join me, Esther Nyonje, every Monday and Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. to dissect and analyze the same. Here, we're not...